Today's reading is from 1 Peter 3:13 through 18 from the Message. If with heart and soul you're doing good, do you think you can be stopped? Even if you suffer for it, you're still better off. Don't give the opposition a second thought. Through thick and thin, keep your hearts at attention in adoration before Christ. Be ready to speak up and tell anyone who asks why you're living the way you are, and always with the utmost courtesy. Keep a clear conscience before God so that when people throw mud at you, none of it will stick. They'll end up realizing that they're the ones who need a bath. It's better to suffer for doing good, if that's what God wants, than to be punished for doing bad. That's what Christ did definitively, suffered because of others' sins, the righteous one for the unrighteous ones. Jesus went through it all, was put to death, and then made alive to bring us to God. The word of God for the people of God.
You just heard a plan. That's a plan for how we're to be in the world as we share the gospel with other people. Have you got your plan books? Have you been working on your Core for Life plan? I sure hope you have, because there's good stuff in here. And this plan book is not for us to tell you how you should live your life out, but for you to pray about that and to work on that with God so that you can plan and be prepared as you can prepared to grow in your own spiritual life with this congregation and into the world. Yesterday, because we love being leaders in the community, Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church, we sponsored Securing Your Place of Worship. We had all kinds of people, over 100 people, I think it was 200 people, in our building yesterday from 35 different denominations, and we had a seminar which our Director of Facilities, Bryant Holmstrom, set up with Kingswood Security Consulting. Their motto is plan, prepare, and protect. And most of the sessions were very interesting. They were interesting sessions because they were designed to help churches decide and figure out a plan, what we would do to keep our buildings safe, our places of worship safe, in case there was an active shooter. And we know that there's been several active shootings in places of worship in the past, and so their whole day was seminars on how could we prepare and make our plan. One of the presenters was Jarrett Brockman. He was the director of Intelligence Services, both for Worship Security Association and Kingswood Security Consulting. He is an expert in criminal intelligence. He's a specialist in global terrorism and violent extremism. He directed the Global Threat Intelligence Program at Wells Fargo, and he was also the founding director for Research of Combating Terrorism Center at the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, and graduate fellow with the CIA's Counterintelligence Center. He was very interesting. He has studied what happens when people decide to go ballistic, when people decide to go postal. What happens in their psychology, in their physiology, and what do we need to do as people to protect ourselves? And so he told us, trust your instincts. Take action versus just reacting. Turn your fear into controlled anger. So if someone comes into the building and starts to shooting, or they do something that threatens our security, we're supposed to stop that fear impulse that all of us have and to move into controlled anger. And I remember vividly, he started to talk about what that looks like, what generates a controlled anger. He said you have to think about what's at stake. You have to think about your loved ones who are waiting for you to come home. And if you don't do something to stop the violence and the shooter, you may not see your loved ones again. You have to want to be with your loved ones and to protect your church so passionately that you will take action. He said the problem with being unprepared is that we often move from our fear into denial. We'll look around the room and see if there's anybody else moving to do something when the room just feels a little bit off, or if we notice something different. And so sometimes we'll just freeze. We'll just stand around and really do nothing until someone steps forward and starts to take action. And sometimes we can get in this place where when there's a threat to us, we can start to deliberate. Is it really happening? What should we do? And we tend to either flinch or freeze, and sometimes we do both. He says it's so important when we're in those moments, in those decisive moments, to take decisive action. And so he said, we must be prepared with a plan. We must be vigilant. We must mentally rehearse before any event occurs what we would do, what door we would leave by, where will we take cover. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and a powerful talk about how important it is to be prepared. And then he said something else. He said, part of my research is that I've gone through all the active shootings and all the testimonies and witnesses after the event occurred, and there always is a hero. There are always people who stand up and take charge and do whatever they can to protect people. And he said, began to study, what is it that made them do something to fight back? And so he looked at the heroes. And he said, we can learn from heroes because they engage when they're threatened. And then he talked about the OODA loop. Have you ever heard of an OODA loop? Some of you have heard it in business. It's a term that's used in business, and I didn't know this, but I learned about the OODA loop. It's OODA, and it stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. Let me say that again. Observe what's going around, be vigilant, and have your eyes tuned, looking around the room, watch what's happening in the room, get a feel for the room, know what's going on, watch carefully, and then orient. Where am I? Where's the door? What's happening? Where could I take cover if I needed to? And then I'd have to decide what needs to be done. What needs to be done? And then act. And then he said this, don't ever give up. He said people can be shot 50 times with bullets and you'll survive it if you don't give up. If you keep running, if you keep moving, if you keep trying to do what you can to protect yourself from further violence. He said keep going and don't give up. And that's what the writer of 1 Peter says to us this morning. Did you get that? You see, 1 Peter is written to the early church. And they're in Asia Minor. And there are people who are persecuting them. It's in the time of Nero. And Nero was a nasty guy. And he was persecuting the Christians because they refused to bow down to the state gods. They refused to go along to get along. And so they were picked on. And they were persecuted. And they were ridiculed. They had mud all over them. And the writer of 1 Peter reminds them that they need to stand firm. And they need to remember who they are. They need to get centered in their hearts of why they do what they're doing. And they need to act like Jesus. Because Jesus didn't fight back against violence, but he did stand strong in his beliefs that we're here to love one another and that we're to help those who are oppressed. And so the writer of 1 Peter asks these persons to do an OODA loop. Observe your world. Yes, there is persecution, but we're called to a higher calling, a calling to share the love of Jesus Christ into the world that is hurting and scared and violent, and we are called as Christians and followers of the one who goes with us to share the love of God in a world like that. We're supposed to orient our hearts to be like Jesus, who was also persecuted. But to keep orienting and reorienting to who we are, to always have an answer for why it is that we live the way we do, lives filled with compassion and mercy and justice. Reorient and orient your lives. And then he says, decide. Always be ready with an answer. Decide that you're here and I'm here to share good news into a world that's filled with bad news. Keep on sharing good news. Act. Keep on doing good, and keep on being respectful and courteous as you do it. In other words, friends, we're not supposed to give in to our fears and quit. Now, I've been thinking a lot about how it is that United Methodists share the gospel into the world. Most of you probably know, if you've been Methodist for all of your life, or maybe just from the last 10 minutes, you know that the Methodist mission comes from the Great Commission of Jesus Christ found in Matthew 28. And that is to go into all the world, making disciples, teaching and baptizing, and obeying commandments. Go everywhere and share this good news that God has broken into our chaos, into the pain of the world, into the suffering of the world. God has sent Jesus Christ to love us into a new kingdom. And we are called as followers of this one who came to rescue us, to share that good news of hope into the world. But it seems to me that sometimes we are afraid. We are afraid to share the good news into the world. Oh, for sure, we're welcoming if people sort of come on into our house. We stand at the door and we shake their hands, and we hope that they're going to feel really comfortable here in our church building, and we welcome them and offer them donuts even, and bacon. And that's a great thing. But that's not the same as offering the gospel of Jesus Christ to hurting people. The greatest threat to the United Methodist Church is our fear. 2 weeks ago, I went with Bishop O, our bishop, all around the state of Minnesota. I first drove up to Duluth, and we met with over 100 people in Duluth as we talked about a way forward, because the United Methodist Church has been struggling with the issue of homosexuality and how the church can best minister to those who are LGBTQ. And there is part of the church who says, we believe that homosexuality is against the Christian teachings, and so we cannot ordain gays and lesbians, and we cannot make them, we cannot fully welcome and be inclusive to homosexuals in our church. And then there's another part of the church, and we are in that part of the church, that says, no, God came for all of us. Jesus did not say this group or that group. God said, I love everyone. I have come for all. And all persons are of sacred worth. All persons are welcome. And this wrangling has been going on since 1972, when the 1972 General Conference added the words into our book of discipline that homosexuality is against the Christian teachings, incompatible with Christian teaching. And ever since that happened, we have been fighting. We have been dividing. We have been arguing, and we have been full of fear. I went to Duluth, and then I went to Rochester, and then I went to Alexandria, and then I went to Bloomington, and then I went to Maple Grove, and then I went to Woodbury. I think I got them all. And we listened, and we prepared our congregations across the state with the 3 plans that the bishops have put forth through the Commission on a Way Forward. I'm not going to go into all of the details of those plans today, but as the head of the delegation for Minnesota, I received a stack of cards this big, because we asked people all over the state of Minnesota, United Methodists all over the state, what are you most afraid of? What are you worried about? What are your questions? I took all of those cards home from all the participants, over 800 participants across the state, and I read them all and typed them out. And what I found was that people are afraid of division. They're afraid of being forced to take a vote in their church that will split their church, which will call out people to make a choice and take a stand when they'd rather just not talk about it. People are afraid that people they love will leave the church on both sides of the aisle. People who are for homosexuals in the church and people who are against. People are afraid people will get hurt. People are afraid. How can we get past this? We need to look at our heroes and learn from them. Heroes observe the needs in the world. Heroes know that there are all kinds of people yearning to hear a message of good news and hope. Gays, lesbians, straights, transgendered, queer, all people. This morning, there are people right outside of our doors who are sitting in the towers that have just been recently built, and they're having their coffee this morning, and they're reading the newspaper, and some of them wonder what goes on in this building. And some of them don't give us a thought because they're convinced that we are not for them, that we have no heart of compassion. It takes a lot of courage for a person to come out. Thursday was National Coming Out Day. And when I have talked with my friends who are lesbian and gay, I hear their stories of pain. And friends, nobody chooses that. Nobody chooses that kind of pain in their life. But when they realize that they're lesbian, gay, or queer, or transgender, or whatever, non-binary, there's all kinds of things, it takes a lot of courage for them to own that for themselves and to say yes to that even in their own lives, to say yes to their real identity. Sometimes it takes months and years and generations for them to come and decide, this is who I really am. And there's a lot of pain around that. And when they finally come out, there are many who are embraced by their families and loved. And people come around them and say, we have always known this about you, and we love you. Or they might say, we didn't know, but we love you. And nothing can change that. Nothing can change that. But there are others who are rejected by their families. They're shut out. And many of our gay youth, as I have mentioned before, are homeless because they have been rejected by their ones who should have loved them. And so it takes a lot of courage to come out, especially in the church. It's a risky business. When I was in the General Conference at Fort Worth, in Tampa, and in Portland, 3 general conferences, when we came to vote on this issue, on whether we would include all people, I remember vividly the gays and lesbians came in from all over the world, and they stood silently around the General Conference delegates. They were not violent. They stood in silence, praying that the Holy Spirit would break through, that we might become a welcoming church. And I remember vividly thinking about that while I was sitting there, and as those terrible votes which rejected the idea that we could be an inclusive church that said to the world, we will not remove those painful and hateful words out of our book of discipline. And I observed the room. And I thought about the needs of people all over the world, hurting people who need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, to hear the words and assurance that they too are loved and saved by one who died on a cross for them too. And I stood and I watched these courageous folks who stood around the room in silence, and I realized something, that they were being Christ in the midst of persecution. And that year after year after year, they show up in our United Methodist churches, knowing that the church in general rejects them, just as people rejected Jesus. And they stand there in love because they refuse to give in to fear and violence. They refuse to leave a church that does not love them back, but one that they love with all their hearts and minds and souls. They refuse to leave our church because they believe it is their calling to be heroes, to lead us to a new time, a new understanding of the depth and breadth and width of God's mercy and God's love. I have several friends who are United Methodist clergy, and they live in the closet. And they serve their congregations well. They nurture the sick. They sit with the dying. They sing with the choirs. They direct choirs. They play the organ. They are everywhere in our churches, and they serve faithfully a church who continues to attempt to shut them out. They are heroes who have observed that the needs of the world are too great for them to stay home and stay silent. And they share their faith by showing up every single Sunday with hearts wide open and ready to serve others, sharing their stories, even when it is very, very risky. They are heroes who have decided to resist the temptation to stand and deny, or to deliberate, or to flinch, or to freeze, or to do anything else. They have decided they will come and act because they are empowered by a love that just won't quit. And it is a love for the church, and it is a love for God. They are heroes who act over and over again, giving everything they've got. Not timid, not cautious, but bold and fearless. They are living out the love of Jesus Christ among us, in us, through us, and into the world in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of places. It takes a lot of guts to come out. Just about every Sunday, I ask you to invite people to church. And I know that's scary. It's scary to go out there and to share your faith when someone asks, what did you do this weekend? So easy to just say, well, nothing much. It's scary to say, you know what, I went to my church. And to wait for that next question that most often comes, well, where do you go to church? I go to church at Hennepin Avenue United Methodist. You see, that's not all that scary, really, when you compare that with coming out or standing in a church where our official stance is that you don't belong here. How scary is it really to share with someone when they're hurting and they're struggling with parenting? How hard is it really for us to come out as followers of Jesus Christ, to come out of the closet and say, you know what, we have a wonderful new parenting group in our church. Would you like to come with me? How scary is it to come out as a follower of Jesus Christ to people who are struggling with addictions and say, how hard is it to say, hey, did you know that we have one of the largest AA groups here in the Twin Cities, and it's right at my church. Would you like to come with me? Are you willing to risk it? To come out? Come out of the closet to share your faith and the love of Jesus Christ with those who are hurting and who are questioning, who are confused, who are curious in your lives? Because that is our call. And sure enough, some people might say to us, what are you doing? Welcoming that kind of person into the church? What are you doing going to church over there? And the words of 1 Peter come back to us again then. If with heart and soul you're doing good, do you think you can be stopped? Even if you suffer for it, you're better still off. Don't give the opposition a second thought. Think through thick and thin. Keep your hearts at attention in adoration of Christ, your master. Be ready. Be ready to speak up. Speak out and speak on behalf of others who are oppressed and mistreated and taunted and shut out. And tell anyone who asks you why you're living the way you are, and always with the utmost curiosity and courtesy. Keep a clear conscience before God so that when people throw mud at you, none of it will stick. Come out. Come out with me. Be bold. Because you see, it's not very likely that we're going to have an active shooter in this sanctuary at any time. But if that were to happen, it'd be a terrible tragedy. But an even greater tragedy is this: that there will be people outside of our doors who never hear of the life-saving grace of Jesus Christ. That would truly be a tragedy. And it's one we can prevent if we only have a plan. In closing, I want you to see some heroes. We learn from heroes. Some of the greatest heroes are the United Methodist women. For 150 years, United Methodist women have worked for justice. They have set up ministry sites, 122 of them, in 110 countries. And they have stood with so many who are oppressed and hurting. And they have been criticized for it. There have been people in the far right of our church who have said they have been taken over by the far left, and there is bickering and fighting. But I'm going to let you decide for yourself. Take a look.
Children, I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do.
What happens when women organize for mission? Women have been in mission for centuries. In 1869, Methodist Episcopal Church women learned that women in India could not be treated by male doctors, so they decided to do something about it. They raised funds to send a woman doctor, Clara Swain, and a woman teacher, Isabella Thoburn, to serve women and children in India. Their bold, courageous action galvanized the movement that's still turning faith, hope, and love into action today. United Methodist women serve in local churches and communities and speak up against injustice. Our second and third mile giving supports mission around the world. When women organize for mission, the needs of women, children, and youth are placed front and center. Over 100 years ago, daring, giving United Methodist women deaconesses set out to serve by founding schools for newly freed African Americans after the Civil War, settlement houses for new immigrants, and mothers' clubs in poor rural communities. Their work remains today as United Methodist women support nearly 100 national mission institutions with services like childcare, parenting seminars, camps for children with special needs, and assistance to immigrants and survivors of human trafficking. When women organize for mission, their work extends around the world to more than 100 countries. And United Methodist women, regional missionaries, engage in edgy, compassionate work in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Here at home, Mission U, a United Methodist Women transformative education program, promotes spiritual growth and Christian discipleship that is faithful, loving, and informed. Just as our foremothers knew long ago, women's lives matter. When women are educated and empowered, the lives of their children, families, and communities improve. And their nation progresses, because that's what happens when women organize for mission. And women still need to organize for mission, because 250,000 women die worldwide from preventable causes related to pregnancy. Climate change and carbon emissions are responsible for 5 million deaths each year. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and the top 10% of the U.S. population has twice the amount of wealth as the bottom 90%. And as United Methodist women continue to work on these critical issues, we also grow in our own most precious faith. We are a 150-year-old women's movement, still saying yes to God's call to mission.
Do what the Spirit say do.
Do what the Spirit say do. Are you ready? Do you have a plan? Go do it.